Hello, coming up in the next half hour, what are the parties going to do to improve our schools? A head teacher and parents tell us what they want. Hello, coming up in the next half hour, what are the parties going to do to improve our schools? A head teacher and parents tell us what they want. Interrogate politicians about homelessness, so says the new Bishop of Dover, so I'll be doing just that.
And I'm at a cafe in Battle, finding out about the election issues that matter to you.
Hello. Each week during the election, we're joined by representatives of some of the parties standing in our region. This week's brave volunteers are Charlotte Cornell, who's standing for Labour in Dover, Alexandra Phillips, the Green Party candidate for Brighton Kemptown, and the Conservatives' Henry Smith, who's standing in Crawley. Now, of course, other candidates are standing in those seats, and if you'd like to check who is a candidate there or indeed anywhere in our region or the rest of the country, you can just go to the BBC News website. Now, the election is all about who's in number 10 after the election, and this morning we're in a Cafe 10 in Battle, where Shelley Phelps is lurking among the croissants and the coffee. Morning to you, Shelley.
Morning, Julia. Yes, that's right. We're in the Cafe 10, which is just off the top of Battle High Street. The staff behind me, they're preparing today's lunch, which is beef casserole. Now, this sits in the Bexhill and Battle constituency, which is a Conservative stronghold. The party won here with a majority of more than 20,000 last time around. But joining me to talk about the election, we've got some staff and customers. I'm joined by Helen Baker. You run a craft shop on the High Street, and you're the president of the local Chambers of Commerce. What are the issues that matter to you in this election?
Okay, I've been in Battle for 10 years on the High Street now, so I see the changes that have been made. And I think the important things to see are there's the lack of police on the High Street, the banks have disappeared, and but most importantly for me is the education of our young people. What we see on the High Street now is constant asking of businesses and parents to support the schools in order to pay for the essentials for their education. We see the special needs education struggling to cope. We see the colleges treating their students as money pits. So they see like a money sign over them rather than the young people who will be our future. We see the young people in universities who are being saddled with debt for the future. And I think this is what's really important, is looking at the future of our young people and their education and what's happened to them.
And we've got some politicians sat in the studio. What's your question to them?
My question to them would be, what are you going to do to ensure that the future of our country, which is in the hands of our young people, is for our young people?
And Sam Matthews, you're the manager here at the cafe. So what about you? What are the issues that are important to you at this election?
NHS. I think the majority of the country feel that way about the NHS. We've had an issue here over the past week where it took 2 hours for an ambulance to actually come to a lady that was lying on the floor, totally for 2 hours. Totally agree with what Helen said as well about the young people in our country as well.
Just quickly, what's your question for the politicians in the studio?
Right, are you going to give the NHS more funding? You know, I think the majority of people in this country would easily give even £1 extra national insurance to see our NHS back on its feet.
OK, thank you very much. Let's see what the politicians have to say.
Well, let's go straight to them. So we had Helen and Samantha there. Let's talk about, we're going to come back to education, but that was a very specific point about contributions to schools. Charlotte, can I ask you, what is an acceptable amount of money for parents to be expected to donate to their schools to top up budgets?
Nothing. The state should be funding our schools at a completely appropriate level. Of course, parents are paying through taxation for that school provision. We shouldn't be in a position where we're shelling out for tissues or to mend chairs. We contribute as part of the PFA, we run the school fetes, we run other initiatives.
So those bits are all right?
They're very different. They've been run forever to top up, to provide extras. But things, the essentials, paper, pens, tissues, whiteboard pens. I know schools who are asking parents to help out with those kind of things. That's absolutely outrageous.
Alexandra, let me ask you the same question. Parents contributing to top up budgets. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely not. You know, we have seen this government take funding away, vital funding away from schools. In Brighton and Hove, where I am, that means £14 million taken away, which is £490 per child per year, and this isn't on. You know, the Green Party would see a huge amount of investment into our education so that teachers, and I'm an ex-teacher, could actually teach, could pass on their passions to their young people, and that's not happening at the moment.
Henry Smith, funding for schools, we're going to come on to the more general point, but on that specific of the community and parents having to throw money into the system, your colleagues on your right-hand side here both think that that is wrong. Should it stop?
Well, yeah, I agree with them. Parents shouldn't have to pay for essential school supplies. And in West Sussex, for example, we've had historic underfunding for many decades. We received about half of the funding in the Tony Blair and Gordon Brown years than schools in London did. There is now, this coming financial year, an increase for West Sussex schools of almost 6%. That is very welcome because Helen's absolutely right in your clip that we need to invest in the country's future. Okay,
very quickly, because we've got the other point as well, and Samantha to get through, but ensuring there's a future for young people in this country, it's quite an open question. Let me go to Alexandra first. How would you address that one?
Well, as Greens, we've got 10 bills that we're taking to Parliament, and one of those 10 is on the future, the next generation, and it really is about securing a future that is fit for purpose, that tackles the climate crisis.
So climate crisis is at the top of that. When you hear the words future for our young people, you say climate crisis. What do you say, Henry Smith?
Well, climate is important, and that's why the commitment, the first major economy to make this commitment, the UK commitment that we will have net zero carbon by 2050 is important, but also an extra £14 billion going into the education system from next year is also vital too.
Okay, let me go to Charlotte on that one. When you hear somebody ask you that to ensure that there's a proper future for young people in this country, what are you hearing and what do you want to tell them?
Well, I've got 3 children myself, and what am I wishing for them? Health, happiness, prosperity, jobs. And in health, that's about environment too, making sure you've got a healthy environment. So jobs, health and happiness. Health first. Okay,
let's go on to Samantha's question. Samantha was talking about the NHS. You're all promising more money for the NHS, aren't you? Let's go to Henry Smith first on this one. How do you persuade her that the Conservatives are the people to vote for? Never traditionally seen as the party of the NHS, of course.
Well, you say that, but out of over 70 years of the NHS's existence, 44 of those have been under Conservative governments, and I think we do have a record of investing. There's an extra 33.9 billion going into the NHS now. That is important, and we'll hear later on today things to help patients and those loved ones who visit patients. Here in the manifesto launch that we are abolishing most car parking charges at hospitals as well. But we also need to increase GP capacity, so the commitment to train an extra 6,000 GPs I think is very important too.
They've got to have people who want to be GPs if you're going to train them, of course. Let's go to Charlotte next on that one. The NHS, you have sought the mantle of being the party of the NHS. How do you hold on to that going into this election when the Conservatives are promising so much extra money?
I think it's wider than more money. We can't just throw endless money at the NHS without looking at some of the structural changes that need to be made to future-proof it. Social care and the NHS have to be looked up in a joined-up way. We have to get people out of hospital into care at home or care in the community, stop bed blocking, increase bed places, get more GPs, get more doctors in, and make sure our migration system can facilitate social care and NHS employment that's really needed.
First one to mention social care linked up with the NHS. Okay, let's go to Alexandra on this one. Samantha wants to know how the NHS is going to be preserved for the future. How would the Greens do that?
Well, one of our 10 bills that I was just talking to you about is around the NHS. It's called the NHS Reinstatement Bill, and what it would seek to do is repeal the 2012 Health and Social Care Act, where many of the problems that we're seeing today started off in. Greens are committed to £6 billion per year in the NHS and £1 billion focused on nurses and nurse training.
What about social care?
Social care is in there as well. It needs to be paid for. You know, the state needs to take a role in that, and people cannot do things like, you know, the Conservatives in the last general election said sell their houses and so forth in order to foot the bill.
It didn't play out very well, social care, in their last election. Boris Johnson has been asked this question. It's in the manifesto, is it?
We'll see what's in the manifesto later on today. So we'll see that launch. I think I'm under pain of death if I reveal things before it's officially launched. But social care is very important, and social care traditionally has been the poor relation to healthcare, principally because it's been delivered via local authorities. So it is an area that desperately needs to be looked at because of the changing demographic of our country.
Are you happy for us to go back and see what our guests in the cafe have made of your answers? Let's do it, Shelley. You've got Helen and Samantha there. What do they make of those responses?
That's right. So what do you make of what we heard from the politicians in the studio there, to your question?
It's really interesting. I don't think it's important what I think of what they said. What's important is what the young people think of what they said. And I would urge all of those people who have just come into voting in the last 3 years, who have never had a vote before, to get out there, think about what you're hearing, and vote for who you thought gave the best answer, or whichever party you think is the best for your future. And that's so important. Please vote, and because it's about you.
Okay. And what about you, Sam? What did you think of your answers?
I've got to be really straight with you. I think every single one of them was a bit of a cop-out.
Really? Not impressed?
Not impressed at all.
What could they do to impress you? What did you want to hear?
Oh, they were just on about this money, that money and everything. There was no actual structure as to what they're going to do about it. Social care, oh my goodness, social care. Old people are selling their properties and having to go into nursing homes and that. You know, they've just got... I don't think they've got a good outlook on it at all.
OK, sorry to stop you there. Well, thank you both very much. I think you've raised some really important points. I'm sure there'll be plenty more opportunities to quiz politicians between now and the election date.
Shelley, thank you very much. And of course, our thanks to Helen and Samantha. They were a little bit stung in the studio, I'll be honest with you. We'll come on to money and whether or not these pledges of money are going down very well at the moment. Now, if you've been tuning into the Sunday Politics regularly, then you will have heard a lot about money, school funding, with head teachers from across Sussex and Kent calling for more and telling us how tighter budgets have been affecting their schools. Now, with an election looming, all the parties are promising to shake that magic money tree. But what do school leaders and parents actually want? Well, we've been to Heathfield and to Nutley near Uckfield in East Sussex to find out.
The refurbished library at Heathfield Community College. Head teacher Caroline Barlow says it wouldn't have been possible without fundraising and donations.
When I balance my capital funding and my building maintenance funding, I have to prioritise the things that are around health and safety. Reading doesn't come top of that list.
Caroline says she has lost the equivalent of 10 full-time teachers and mental health support for some students.
We no longer offer a counsellor to our students full-time in site. We have to partially fund that for those who we need to, and others are signposted for parental support. And for some of our students in a rural environment, that's really tricky.
For these parents, it's not just funding that needs to change.
The school system is great in this country. We have wonderful, dedicated teachers. I think what needs to change is the education system needs to be less of a one-size-fits-all.
I love our education system, the fact that it's free for all pupils. The food provisions are great. One thing I would change is the out-of-hours care, so breakfast and after-school clubs. That can be a real sticking point for working parents.
One thing I'd change is classroom size. I think 34 children in a class. The children are no longer independent learners and individuals. It's very hard for the teacher to work on them independently, so I'd change classroom size.
But what are the political parties offering? Labour says it will increase the school's budget by £10.5 billion from 2022 and provide free school meals to all primary-age children. The Liberal Democrats will also be handing out free school meals, as well as increasing funding by £10.6 billion a year by 2024. The Greens promised to increase funding by at least £4 billion a year and reduce class sizes to under 20 in the long term. The Conservatives say they will give schools £7.1 billion a year from 2022, as well as increasing teachers' salaries. Back at Heathfield, Caroline's message to the politicians is clear.
What's at stake is the future of young people. We have to reach a point where there's cross-party agreement on a 10-year plan for education, which removes that triangle of accountability, recruitment, retention and funding pressure, and means that we can plan long-term for students' well-being and success.
I was Pete Humphreys reporting, and Pete spoke to the head at Heathfield Community College, Caroline Barlow, and parents outside a different school. It was a primary school in Nutley near Uckfield. Let's pick up on what they had to say. Henry Smith, you've been in power since 2010. Why have you waited till now to promise more money for education?
Well, I think education has been being funded over the last 9 years, but
well,
clearly...
of course it's been being funded, but the real terms drop in terms of per pupil has been significant. It's been dramatic over the last 10 years.
Well,
why wait till now?
In West Sussex, we've had underfunding of schools going back for a number of decades, half the funding that schools in London have received, and so there is a great degree of catch-up that needs to happen. But what I thought was very interesting from your interview of those parents was other issues such as how the school day works around working life, and I think there's a lot more that can be done in a practical sense.
Good spot. We'll come on to that in a moment. Just quickly, I mean, we were definitely hearing from the cafe in Battle that those big figures are going over people's heads and they're finding them perplexing, but your parties are promising to throw more money at education. The Labour Party is promising billions of pounds of extra money. Why is that? Are you missing a trick here? Because it doesn't seem to be cutting through these bold figures, do they?
I think what cuts through, you're right, figures of money seem endless. We're bombarded by them. What people really latch onto are promises like free school meals for all primary school children, class sizes absolutely capped at 30, because certainly in Kent and really down in Dover and Deal where I am, there's class sizes that have bulged over the past 5, 6, 7 years, along with slashed budgets where we're losing an average of £290 per pupil shortfall up to 2020. That's tangible because you feel that the per pupil cut, that's a lot of money per year per pupil not being spent on their education.
You're speaking as an ex-teacher.
Yes.
So is Alexandra, who's sitting next to you. Is just throwing more money at education, is that the biggest solution, or have you got some brighter idea in the Green Party?
I think money is part of it because, for example, class sizes, which one of the interviewees mentioned, you know, the Greens want to see class sizes drop from 34 to less than 20. We would also scrap privatisation in our education system. So things like academies, which were brought in under Labour and that the Tories have gone to town on. They've brought in free schools and things like that. People are noticing that the local education that they have is not in local community hands, and that's what they want.
You'd put it back, right. Let's talk about teachers, numbers of teachers. Caroline Barlow, who was the head in our film, says she's lost the equivalent of 10 full-time teachers. She also talked about not having a full-time counsellor. If we've got time, we'll go on to children and their mental health. How, Caroline, Charlotte first, how will you fix the recruitment problem in schools? The TES says we are short 47,000 in secondary alone. How close is that to your own recruitment targets?
It's important that we get the teachers in. We're not getting the teachers in for numerous reasons. The testing culture, we want to scrap SATs, we want to reform Ofsted into a new body that doesn't neglect schools that have been rated outstanding for 10, 15 years, that makes it a much more supportive body. We also want to introduce a school counsellor in every single school, because children's mental health is vital. As I said previously, health is the most important thing when you're looking forward for a happy, long life, and that starts at school.
Henry Smith, that reform of Ofsted goes down well with teachers when political parties talk about that. Where are you on how we hold schools to account but don't damage them with ratings and perhaps testing and the Ofsted regime?
Well, standards in our schools have been improving, but they need to improve further still. And I was very concerned when several weeks ago Labour were proposing scrapping Ofsted. It's quite interesting to hear now that it's a reform of Ofsted that is apparently being touted. But I do think standards are very important, and I would also add that I think mental health support in schools is is also vital. That is something that was announced earlier this year by
what?
the government.
What are you proposing?
And so, for example, in Crawley, there are a number of pilot programs where there are mental health support workers in schools, because that is a key aspect that, when I was a member of Parliament, was a significant part of casework.
I mean, I promised we would talk about this. Let's talk about it a little bit more. Alexandra, no full-time counsellor at Heathfield Community College. Another former head from Kent, who I spoke to recently on Hustings on my BBC Radio Kent show, said his big burning question in education is about children's mental health. An NEU survey of 8,000 head teachers and support staff said 33% had seen an increase in mental health problems among pupils. What do we do for our young people to stem this tide?
You know, this mental health crisis that we're seeing, particularly among young people, needs to be dealt with in schools. It's the best place for it. And that's why, as the Green Party, we are promising counsellors, mental health support in every single school. Without that, we're not going to see the kind of support in place for young people, but also balance. And scrapping Ofsted is something that we have proposed. I'm pleased that Labour are now following suit. And we need a different system of testing both students and schools, and it needs to be a local system accountable to local politicians and local people, and that's what we're presenting.
I absolutely agree here, and just picking up on something Henry said earlier, where standards have increased. We actually don't know, because when you're rated outstanding currently under Ofsted, you are then not re-inspected.
Though that is due to change, but you're right. I mean, I've looked at schools, including my own children's schools in Kent, and I question a whole generation of children can go through a school with an outstanding rating without anybody going back and looking at it. So on that issue, is the way we check our schools at the moment fit for purpose, Henry?
Well, I think we always need to evolve the way we check our schools. I don't think there's a steady state ever in terms of the system that we have. But what is important is that we get the balance right, where schools aren't over-inspected and there isn't a huge burden on teachers, that they're allowed to actually get on with the day job of providing
The burden on teachers, Henry, is over-testing. It's preparing for Key Stage 1 stats, Key Stage 2, the grammar system, the test. It's test, test, test. And that's what we want to get rid of.
Do you want to do anything about testing in primary schools?
Well, we are living in a very competitive global economy. If we don't equip our young people with those skills and standards, we will suffer for future generations.
But a lot of those tests are, I mean, they're not necessarily things you take out into the workplace, which leads me on to, very briefly, one of the parents in the film lamented what they described as the one-size-fits-all system of education and mentioned vocational education. Let me go to Henry first on this, and briefly, so everyone can have a say. What will your party do to ensure that technical and vocational qualifications are held in proper esteem?
Well, we've introduced, as a Conservative government, T-levels, technical levels, as an education system, and extending apprenticeships as well, I think, is very important as well.
Okay, let's go to Alexandra on that.
So one of our huge platforms at this election is a thing called the Green New Deal, which will see a huge amount of investment in renewable energies, energy efficiency measures and training in place, and young people are really well placed to take that training because many of them want to have a hand in tackling the climate crisis.
A final quick thought, Charlotte, on vocational qualifications and technical qualifications.
I actually agree with Alex here. The jobs our children are going to have and haven't been invented yet. In 20 years, it's a different sort of employment market, and our technical qualifications and technical training needs to be future-proof for a green vision.
Little element of consensus, at least among two of you. Thank you for talking so much on education. Now, on Monday, Rose Hudson-Wilkin was consecrated as the new Bishop of Dover. She's Britain's first black woman bishop and was previously chaplain to the Speaker of the House of Commons. Rob Smith spoke to her at St Paul's Cathedral.
Rose Hudson-Wilkin has been at the heart of the establishment for some time now. But one of the issues that she feels most strongly about is homelessness.
I think together we need to recognise that this is a real issue. We cannot be proud of ourselves that we're the 5th richest nation and still see that kind of poverty on our streets, of people having no roof over their heads, in particular in hostile climates. We need to not put a sticking plaster on this. We really need, as a society, to be interrogating those who are in political leadership.
Okay, let us do what the Bishop asked us and interrogate you on homelessness, if that's all right with you. That's why you're here. Look, there's an issue of trust here for the Conservatives, Henry Smith. You are led by a man, Boris Johnson, who promised in 2009, when he was Mayor of London, to end rough sleeping in the city within 3 years. Figures 10 years on for 2018-19 showed that nearly 9,000 people were sleeping rough on the capital streets, 2.5 times as many as when he made that pledge. Why would anyone trust the Tories on homelessness?
Well, of course, Sadiq Khan is the Mayor of London now, and we've seen a number of figures go in the wrong direction.
No, hold on. That's not
but
good enough. This is an issue of trust. A promise made by your leader, and 10 years later, it had more than doubled homelessness. So why would people trust you?
Well, it is very important to address homelessness. It has been an issue that is of wide concern. There is the reducing rough sleeping strategy that the government has introduced. In my constituency, £1.5 million has been pledged to reduce homelessness. So it is an issue, but we also need to ensure that there is the support for mental health, because a lot of the issues behind rough sleeping are people who are suffering mental health issues.
Okay, you could be a hostage to fortune promising to end rough sleeping. Both Labour and the Liberal Democrats have said they will do it within 5 years. Look what happened to Boris Johnson when he made that promise. It just wasn't possible to enact it. Hostage to fortune on this one, your party, Charlotte?
Well, I hope not, and I think that's the key difference between our leaders. We've got Boris Johnson, who has always been shown to lie and fail to deliver his word, and whatever you say about Jeremy, he's a man of integrity and principle and has stuck by it. We've got to hope, haven't we? We've got to aim for it. We've got to have that as the ultimate ambition. We'll try our hardest to get there. We want to make 8,000 accommodations available very quickly to help accommodate our rough sleepers initially. We want to expand SWEP. If we're elected, we're going to expand the rough sleeping cold programme SWEP initially. Immediate action is necessary.
Let's look at the Green Party. Are you making a specific pledge to do away with rough sleeping? Do you think it's possible to do that?
Well, look, I think it's a national scandal that we've got homelessness in this country. It has increased by 50% since the Tories have been in power, and very little has been done about it. It means that people, working families, are 1/3 of them are just one pay packet away from being on the streets. Something radical has to change. It has to change to the universal credit, the benefit system, which lies in a large part of this, not actually people's mental health. It's to do with your dirty universal credit system, and also housing. And we're putting 2 bills forward, one on creating 100,000 new homes every year for the next 10 years, and the other on giving renters the rights, because at the moment people in the private sector do not have those rights.
I know these things are connected, but I do want to stay very specifically with street homelessness. Homeless people have the right to vote. Lots of people have spotted that in the news this week. There was the brewery or the bar that said you could register there if you wanted an address. Does anybody here actually canvassed a rough sleeper yet?
Yes.
Quickly, tell us about it.
The Crawley Open House homeless shelter in Crawley, and I was there the other evening speaking with people who are
And are they going to
from the
vote,
services
these rough sleepers? Can they?
Yes, they can register to vote at an address, and that is possible in Crawley.
Charlotte, you've canvassed a rough sleeper as well?
Yeah, we were in the town centre in Dover 2 weeks ago, and there's quite a lot of rough sleeping actually there, and I went over and asked some gentlemen if they were registered, and they actually, you're right, they didn't know they could vote. So we had the chat and saw if we could deliver an address.
Very, very quickly, the Vagrancy Act. It's nearly 200 years old, and it underpins our country's attitude to homeless people. It criminalises people who don't have a safe place to call home. Your party's definitely said scrap. Henry Smith, what about the Conservatives?
It should be scrapped, and my colleague Bob Blackman has done a lot when he was an MP like me, speaking about this issue. It's not fit for purpose. We need to move forward to the 21st century.
Thank you all. We've covered so much ground, and thanks to our guests as well in the cafe in Hastings. Good to see you all this Sunday morning. That is all that we've got time for this week. My thanks to all of today's guests. We are back next Sunday. Until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Thank you.